end of the period.
I'll try. No problem.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, take your notes out. We're going to be continuing with the Protestant Reformation, going beyond the original Protestant. Who was the original Protestant? Thank you very much. Martin Luther. And he founded what church? The Lutheran Church, which is a Protestant church, okay? So we'll be moving on to talk about John Calvin. We'll talk about Calvinist church and so forth. We'll talk about another Protestant church. We'll talk about the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England, which starts out Catholic but ends up Protestant. And all kinds of interesting things there going on. Okay? Get a quiz next week, right? Oh. When's the quiz? Friday. What's it over? History. There we go. Can we be a little bit more specific? I think I heard chapter 17. Okay? 20 points. All right? Would you like another round of practice on that? Uh-huh. I'm hearing some uh-huh. Okay? Because you got the, what was that other one? It had to do with, what was that? We were going through some of the reading. And let me see. Oh, that's right. I took the first item. Always a good thing to do. Write down. If you do this, write down a couple of sentences for each of the different items as you look them up, okay? Then you'll have that, and the retake opportunity, I don't actually set up a time for you to retake the quiz, but it is basically turning in that sheet of paper where you have 2 sentences for each of the things. By the way, when you do 2 sentences for each of the items, you end up preparing yourself pretty well, okay? So, I've got it right here. If you have it in front of you, that's fine too. You don't have your textbook, that's fine, because I had you leave it at home. But I'm going to go to the very last one that was from near the end of the chapter on page 398, potatoes and population growth. Potatoes. By the way, I need a volunteer. Nobody's raising their hand, so I'm going to call on you. Blake, spell potato. Go. Is that right? How many guys raise your hand? That's right. How many guys raise your hand? That's wrong. How would you spell it? That's an interesting thing. I was going to bring this up. Is there an E on the end of potato? How many of you guys say yes, there's an E on the end of potato? How many guys say no, there's not an E at the end of potato? This is interesting. I think this is honestly one of those words that actually sometimes ends with an E and sometimes it doesn't. I think it's like there's debatable. Take a look at my presidents over here, right? President number 41, that's George H.W. Bush. Not as well known was his vice president, Dan Quayle, who was doing a visit to a classroom once upon a time while he was vice president, and they were doing a spelling bee, right? And the kid was supposed to spell potato, and he spelled it just the way that Blake did. And the vice president corrected him on it, just like you did. And you said you misspelled it with an E. And so then there was this whole big thing in the news about how to spell potato, right? You'd think people in Idaho would know how to spell potato, but you guys are of a difference of opinion. All right, now here's an easy one. Brielle, how do you spell potatoes? Yeah, go for it. Actually, you can look right at the seat because you've got it right there, yeah. Yeah, there's always an E if you do the plural. Potatoes has it, and it's on the license plate, you know, unless you took it off. Potatoes, right? So where did potatoes come from originally? Idaho, no. I mean, they were in the Americas. They were in the Americas before they went over to Europe and Asia and so forth. And they're going to be one of the things that are in there. I'm like, so what does it have to do with population growth? All right, well, I'm going to read some stuff to you. Raise your hand if you feel as though I've read enough so that you have an understanding of the relationship between potatoes and population growth. Are you ready? All right, so this is reading comprehensions. This is what you're going to be doing. I've guided you to the page 398, okay? And then you're going through and you're reading it and going, oh, those are big words. Oh, what am I going on? It's like a word search. It's like a term search, okay? And if you really do get stuck, understand this. I'm open to emails, Like, I'll even direct you to perhaps the paragraph. I still get emails from now, like, seniors and juniors who are like, well, what page is it on? I'm like, I gave the page numbers to the 9th and 10th graders. If you get stuck and you can't quite figure out the paragraph, then we could direct you to the paragraph. But, I mean, there's like 4 or 5 paragraphs in here. All right, here we go. Agriculture began to change. Until the late 17th century, Western Europe had continued to rely on largely on the methods and techniques characteristic of the Middle Ages, a severe economic constraint in an agricultural society. The three-field system still meant that a full third of all farmland was left unplanted each year to restore fertility. First in the Netherlands and then elsewhere, new procedures for draining swamps added valuable land. Have they said anything about potatoes yet? Okay, nope. Reformers touted nitrogen-fixing crops to reduce the need to leave land idle. Cool. Stock breeding improved, and new techniques such as seed drills and the use of scythes instead of sickles for harvesting increased productivity. Nothing yet. Some changes spread particularly fast on large estates, but other changes affected ordinary peasants as well. Particularly vital in this category was the spread of the potato from the late 17th century onward. There we've got the word, potato. Have you learned enough yet? No hands yet. All right, let's go to the next. Oh, here we go, the next paragraph. A New World crop, the potato had long been shunned because it was not mentioned in the Bible and was held to be the cause of plagues. Enlightened government leaders and the peasants' desire to win economic security and better nutrition led to the widespread use of this crop. In sum, the West improved its food supply and agricultural efficiency, leaving more labor available to the other pursuits. You kind of got a hand up there? You think that there's some relationship there so far? It looks like there's a little bit. It doesn't really nail it yet, but it gives a bit of a hint, doesn't it? Right? If you guys detect a little bit of a hint, like which direction is it going? As in, like, population growth, more, less population growth, or somewhere in between? What does it look like it's heading toward? Maybe a little bit more. All right, let's see if we can read a little bit further. I'm going to skip a couple paragraphs here. This is the last paragraph on the page here. It says, finally, let me see if I got that right here. Oh, yeah, here we go. Finally, agricultural changes, commercialism, and manufacturing combined, particularly after about 1730, to produce a rapidly growing population in the West, meaning Europe. With better food supplies, more people survived, particularly with the aid of the potato. At this point, everyone should have their hand up saying, I think I've actually heard enough. Do you feel like you've heard enough? All right, now here comes the question. This particular one, on your quiz, I've got half of them. Matching. So I got 2 sections of matching, pretty much with names, so the names of the people that are on that list that you need to know. Machiavelli, Gutenberg, Luther, Calvin, Galileo, Copernicus, William Harvey, Isaac Newton, John Locke, and so forth, Adam Smith. Those ones are in matching sections. A lot of the other ones show up in true-false. And this is a true-false question. You ready? I'll read it, and I'll ask you to show hands, true or false. Okay? All right, here we go. True or false? Europe increased its food production during this time in part due to growing potatoes. Raise your hand if you say that is a true statement. Raise your hand if you would say that is a false statement. You're going false. Why would you say false? You don't know. Why would you say true? Why would you say true?
Well, because the potato being potency is so widespread, it was, easy to grow, and
Yeah.
so a lot of people actually got it.
Yeah, and we're going to have that as officially part of your notes later on. It does come out here, and I think the reading comprehension shows that it's a true statement. So that's 2 questions you know about ahead of time. Some of the other class was like, they picked up on the part about the potato being shunned because it wasn't mentioned specifically in the Bible. Because the Bible, as it was written, mostly dealt with things associated with Europe and Asia and Africa, and the New World was where the potatoes were, so you didn't have it mentioned there. But nevertheless, it's good, right? It's Idaho. It's awesome. It's a potato. Okay? All right, so you've got that coming up in a week, plus 1 day. All right? Going to be good on that? Good. Okay, and then, of course, next week, we're going to have for you, regardless of where we are here, when you guys come in on Monday, we'll sit you down and share with you the top 25 people from the millennium. That they did that poll like about 20 years ago. And some of them we've already talked about. Raise your hand if you can tell me one of the people in the top 25. Yes? Gutenberg, where do you come in? Number 1. Have we gotten to number 2 yet? No. Number 3? Number 4, actually, we actually just did, but I'm not going to tell you who it was, but we did do him not too long ago. What about among Renaissance artists? Who are the top? Raise your hand if you want to say, I know the top 2 artists. Yes, go ahead. Who's your other top 2? Botticelli, Donatello, Leonardo, what? Raphael. How many of you guys would say, what was the one you said, Michelangelo? How many of you guys would say Michelangelo rates as one of the top 2 Renaissance artists? Ah, easy. Like, what did he do? Painted the ceiling, did some pretty cool sculptures and so forth, and architecture. Any other candidates for, like, the other of the top 2? Yeah. Why? Because it sounds like one of them. Sure, it sounds like. What did he ever do that would rate him so high up there with Michelangelo? Anybody want to chime in? What did Leonardo do? Yeah? The Mona Lisa? Okay, so that's a really good painting. That's one really good painting, yeah? The last, okay, there's 2 really good paintings. Anything else that he did that you guys remember that was like pretty cool? Yeah? Oh, invention. So we'll throw that into the mix too. And design and so forth. Not so much sculpture, but painting, invention, design. And yeah, both of those ended up in the top 2. So watch on Monday. Actually, we do it on Monday and then on Wednesday too. The top 25, and quite a few of them are from this time period. You'll see which one is going to be rated higher. How many of you think Michelangelo rates higher than Leonardo? How many think Leonardo rates higher than Michelangelo? Well, we'll find out how the voters decided, okay? Not that it makes any difference, but there's some good clips on all those ones, plus some of the people before and some of the people after. So that's what's going to be coming up here on Monday, Wednesday, and then, of course, Friday you got the quiz. And then what do you need to bring in here? What would you want to bring in here by Tuesday, November the 11th? Excuse me, November the 3rd. Yeah, what extra credit? Have you guys, any of you guys been working on this so far? Have you? Nope. When are you gonna work on it? You gonna do it? Or are you just gonna like blow off those extra credit points? I'll do it, I guess. Okay, how are you gonna do it? No, not are you gonna do it? How are you gonna do it? I'm still not getting a very good answer from him. How are you going to do it? Yes, I'm going to do it. How is he going to do it? Yes? Look at a map? Yeah, like on a website? Yeah, because those websites are going to be very helpful. Yeah, so you can go to the one that I showed you, or you can go to any of the other ones and so forth. Okay? Apparently tonight is the last debate between Biden and Trump. So you can watch that tonight. And apparently the moderator does have a mute button. So like a Zoom session and so forth. So we'll see how that plays out. The election is over within 2 weeks. So yeah, get that turned in by the election day Tuesday. Okay? All right. Shall we continue? All right, let's do this. Well, last we left off, Martin Luther had success in staying alive, expressing his points of view, leaving the Catholic Church, setting up a new church, a Protestant church called the Lutheran Church, and having some people to help him out and protect him against anybody working for the Pope that would say, come on down here to Rome, we're going to cause you some problems. Who would have been somebody, Sophia, who helped Martin Luther? Who's his BFF? John Frederick. Who's John Frederick? Yeah, so we knew why one of the reasons perhaps why he supported Luther. Who was he? I mean, who was he? Was he like a religious leader or a political leader? Political leader, yeah. So think of him as, not exactly like king, but think of him as like the top leader in that region called Saxony. If you went to Saxony today, you would be in a country known as Germany. There were lots of those different, let me see if I can go back to this map here. So if you were to overlay like the country of Germany over here, it's going to be most of this area right here is the modern country of Germany. If you were to look at a more realistic map of that time, you would see literally dozens and dozens of territories. And Saxony happened to be like right in here, and there's Bavaria, and there's Hanover, and there's all kinds of various different bits and pieces. You're not going to see it all united as one big country called Germany until 1870, and we're not even going to get to that in this unit. This whole brown area is called the Holy Roman Empire, and they had a guy who was actually in close cooperation with the Pope. And the Holy Roman Empire did want to get hold of Martin Luther. Write this down. You ready? Holy Roman Empire. It starts out all Catholic. By the time we get finished with this Protestant Reformation, it's going to be busted. You're going to have areas that are Protestant, and you're going to have areas that are Catholic. I told you this Protestant Reformation is a big deal. It starts with Martin Luther, but it will continue. In fact, write this down. I want to give you a visual of where this is going to go. This is pretty much kind of the way it is today, although there's a lot of people in Europe that are not Catholic or not Protestant, not anything necessarily as far as like a Christian group. But eventually, take a look at this. Actually, I'll ask you, which part of Europe, and when I mean Europe, I mean more Western Europe, which part of Europe is going to end up being more Protestant? I'll give you a choice. The southern half or the northern half? How many of you guys say the southern half is going to be more Protestant? How many of you guys say the northern half is going to be, wow. You guys, did you know that, or why would you say the northern half is going to be more Protestant? Yeah, I've kind of hinted at that quite a bit. And you've got the Pope right here in Rome. You're right, write that down. The southern part of Western Europe, places like Italy, Spain, Portugal, they're going to remain very Catholic. And actually, even among these German areas, the southern parts of the German areas, like Austria, like where that church was that I showed you with the dead bodies and the altar, right? In Austria, that's going to remain very Catholic. France is going to remain quite Catholic. Switzerland, you can't really quite see Switzerland right in here. It's going to be a mix. You're going to have some areas that'll be Protestant and some areas that'll be Catholic. And then Britain, we're going to spend some time talking about Britain at some point, maybe even today. That's going to be an interesting story altogether. There's a lot of drama going on in Britain, and we're going to unfold that. Okay? So, as far as the northern German areas, Protestant. Got that? And what do we call those countries to the north of that? Anybody help me out? Generally it's referred to as Scandinavia. I need some Scandinavian people because I got some Scandinavian heritage. My last name is Scandinavian. Raise your hand if you can tell me. Some of the countries in the northern part of Europe, in Scandinavia. Yes? Sweden. That is one. I've got Swedish heritage. Okay, any others? Oh, come on. Yes? Finland, absolutely. Finland. Let me go over to this map because this one's not very good. So Finland is right up here, right? There's Sweden, the green one. Yes? What? The UK is not referred to as Scandinavia, but you could say it's sort of like northwest part of Europe. There's two other ones. Yep? Norway, absolutely. And then there's this little one that's just sort of north of Germany, and that's actually where I get my last name spelled, Hansen. If it was Hanson, that would be the Swedish spelling, but this is the way they spell it in. Starts with a D, rhymes with Denmark. Thank you very much, Denmark. Okay? So if you were to go to Scandinavia, they're going to end up being, write this down, Lutheran countries. Denmark and Sweden, Norway, they're going to end up being predominantly Lutheran countries. I want to say even Finland has got a lot of Lutherans there too. That's going to be very popular there. Hold on to your horses because we got a lot more different Protestant mixes, right? Just to double check on this one, what would you say? Vinny, is Luther like the new Protestant Pope? Does his church have a pope? No, write it down. The Protestant churches are not going to have popes. Most of them, and it's going to vary. Some of them will have some very important people at the top. Others will just be like, well, who's your local pastor? You know, who's your local leader of your local church? They'll organize it differently. Catholic Church is still going to be the same. The Pope is at the top. Okay? And the Pope, whenever a Pope dies, they'll pick a new Pope. Although, actually, right now we have a Pope and a former Pope. The previous Pope didn't die. He just got really old and is like, can I just retire? They're like, okay, fine. So what do you do with a former Pope? He lives at the Vatican. I mean, he lives in Rome. I mean, he's got rooms. So the current Pope is like, I don't know, he might walk down the hall or something and talk to the previous Pope. But anyway, so it's going to be an interesting mix. So we're going to be looking at this religious thing. So, put this down. It's going to be, I don't know, sometimes people say, I don't know about religion. They're always fighting with each other. All the wars in the world ever have been about religion. That's not true. Not all the wars in the world's history have been about religion. Some of them, and during this particular time period, we'll see quite a few of them, because people are going to have some pretty hot ideas about religion, and they'll come to fighting each other. But even in the midst of that, the old favorite traditional reasons for war. Why do countries go to war? Why is my country going to go to war with your country? Yeah, we disagree. It's like, you've got your stuff, I want your stuff, hand it over. You don't want to hand it over? Oh my gosh, we're at war. I mean, that's one of the basic principles of going to war. I want your stuff. I'm going to take your stuff. You don't give it to me, I'll go to war with you. Okay? I mean, it's been around for a long time. But yeah, lots of differences of opinion. But during this time, you can write this down, there will be some wars. And we'll get into the details of some of the wars that take place. But even among those so-called religious wars, sometimes you're going to find like two countries against each other, and they're both Catholic countries. Why would they be against each other if they're both Catholic? Well, they're two countries, and they're at war, hello. I mean, it happens sometimes. All right, now, let's fill it out. We got some more people to talk about. I want to talk about John Calvin. You ready? Let's talk about John Calvin. He is a very important Protestant leader. Just like Luther, he comes after Luther, and he is going to have some Protestant ideas. A lot of them agree with Luther. Some of them disagree with Luther, okay? And his ideas are going to become very popular. So when we look in Europe, in the early stages of the Protestant Reformation, you can say, what are the two most popular forms of Protestantism, right? The two most popular forms of Christianity or moving away from the Catholic Church. One, Lutheranism, okay? The one that Luther did. The other is going to be called Calvinism. Calvinism, started by John Calvin. I mean, it helps. That'll help you easy to remember. Except, sorry, folks, follow along as I give you the notes on these as we go forward. Because sometimes, depending on what country you go to, it's going to be called something different. So the Calvinists, when we get to France, hold off on that. They're going to be called Huguenots. I'll write it up on the board. You'll see how that plays out. When we look at the Calvinists, when we get to, like, Britain, They might be referred to, say, as Puritans and so forth. Right? So it's going to be a little bit of a different take. So let's find out a little bit more about John Calvin. Okay? He's from Switzerland. Okay? You guys know where Switzerland is? Is it flat or mountainous? It's very mountainous. It's right there in the center, well, south center of Europe, just north of Italy, in the high mountain. Very beautiful there. If you go up to some of the high mountain areas like in Idaho, it would be reminiscent, like the Sawtooth Mountains, very reminiscent of the kind of scenes you would see in Switzerland. Okay? John Calvin was from a city known as Geneva, and he started the Calvinist Church. He also broke away from the Catholic Church, and he followed a lot of the ideas of Luther, and he really focused in on a thing called predestination. Predestination. Write that word down. John Calvin and predestination. I've actually got it bullet pointed so you can see it on the handout that I gave you at the beginning. Predestination. I know what destination means. If that right there is my destination, I'm going to go there. Look, I have arrived at my destination. Wow. Is that what he's talking about? What do you suppose the destination is that John Calvin might be referring to in his, I mean, we haven't even hardly gotten into it, but what do you suppose, what's the best destination possible in the view of somebody who is talking about Christianity? Heaven, yes, write it down. Predestination. The destination is heaven, so what does the pre have to do with? I mean, what is that? What's going on here? People go to heaven like after they're dead, right? Isn't that the basic understanding? Well, and that's what they would say. After you die, then you go to heaven. Or, what's the alternate destination? Actually, in Calvinism, it's like, yeah, up or down. You're not going to have that purgatory thing where somebody's going to be buying indulgences for you to forgive you of your sins and so to build a church in Rome. It's either up or down. Got that? So then what's the predestination? Here's the deal. As John Calvin reads the Bible, he sees in there words that indicate that people are either going to go to heaven or hell, and you know it beforehand. That's what the predestination is. I'll say it again. The idea that you are predestined to go to heaven or hell, and that can be determined, figured out ahead of time. Now that raises an interesting question. Okay? Let's follow up on this a little bit. So John Calvin is saying, as he reads the Bible, all humans are predestined to go to heaven or hell. They're either chosen or they're not. It is God's choice. Right there. Heaven or hell. Is there any other concept that might kind of cut against that idea that, I mean, here you are, and you're either going or you're not. I mean, you're going there or you're going there. Or, excuse me, there or you're going there. Is there any other concept? Raise your hand if you want to raise your hand. Did you want to raise your hand? Did I know she was going to raise her hand? Was she predestined to raise her hand? Why did you raise your hand? Did you make that choice? Was that a free choice that you made to raise your hand? Do you have control over whether or not you raise your hand? What is that called? What is it called? When you can choose to do this or that. Freedom of choice. Free will. It's the basic concept. Write that down. Free will. Don't tell me I am doomed to do this or that. I am set to go here or that. Has anyone ever told you, oh, you're such and such and such and such and such. You're going to definitely go there. Or have people said to you, alternatively, it's your life. You have so many choices. Make the best choices and so forth. Okay? How many of you guys are like, I know where I'm going to be in 20 years. It's predestined. It's predetermined. Whatever I do, I can't change it. I mean, it makes for some really good sci-fi movie plots and so forth. Let's say you had a machine, you could go back in time and change something. Could you? Would it change the path of time? I don't know. Nobody ever has that. You can write some great movies and so forth about it. But here's a conflict. Write it down. We have a conflict because other people, make sure you have this down, will say in the Bible, it also says that people have free will. Oh my goodness. We've got two conflicting things going on there. On the one hand, you have some verses saying God chooses those who are going to heaven and hell. On the other hand, you have other verses that seem to point to you choose, for example, whether or not to believe. There's a conflict there. It's a really interesting conflict. Which side does John Calvin come down on mostly? Does he say people have the free will to choose whether or not to believe in Christ and then therefore they will go to heaven? Not so much. You can write that down. John Calvin is not so much the free will. His view is more, it's determined. Oh, and here's the other kicker. This is very important. You get this? Listen very carefully. Because if you're living in John Calvin's community in Geneva, and people are walking around looking at people and sizing people up, because that's what they do. They look around, they're sizing people up and so forth. Do you want the people in your community to think you're going to hell? Raise your hand if you want the people in your community to think you're going to hell. Raise your hand if you want the people in your community to think you're going to heaven. You're like, hello? Yeah, I mean, if you're like not buying into John Calvin's thing, you probably would have moved to some other community. So write this down. In John Calvin's community, everybody wanted to be seen as going to heaven. So what are you talking about? Like if somebody comes up and asks you, are you going to heaven? And they say, well, that's an easy question. Yes. But there's a little bit more to it. And this is where things get kind of interesting. John Calvin would say there are signs of whether or not you're predetermined. You're predestined to go to heaven. You got that? There are signs of if you're predestined to heaven, just like there are signs if you're predestined to go to hell. Got it? Anybody have any idea of what those signs might be? What do you think? What could be a sign? Keith, what would be a sign if you're living in Geneva, in John Calvin's Geneva, in Switzerland at that time, and people are walking down the street and they're looking at you and going, he's going to heaven. What might be a sign? Or maybe they're saying the other one, he's going the other place. It's going to be dark, nasty. What do you suppose? Good, write that down. If people have very positive things assigned to them, like good clothes. Now, how do you get good clothes? You got to have money. How do you get money? This is actually a good point. We're getting right to it. I mean, this is very efficient. Write it down. One of the signs that people are going to heaven, at least as far as like in John Calvin's community, is that they are successful. Now, they would throw in another word there, like they're blessed. God has shown his favor upon them by giving those people who are predestined to go to heaven all the blessings, including wealth that they can use for nice clothes and a nice house and nice stuff. You got that? Like the signs of, we might call it like the signs of success, but those would also float into the signs of you're being blessed and you're going to heaven. You understand that? Now think about that. Would you like to be sick? How many of you guys are like, I'd like to be successful? Okay? I'd like to have all that stuff. I'd like to have the money. All right, can somebody raise your hand and tell me, besides the view that it happens to you because you're blessed and God has shown favor upon you, raise your hand if you can tell me, is there any other thing, any other plan that might lead to you being successful? There's also luck. Yeah, I mean, somebody's walking around and they're like, well, he's not going to heaven. He's just lucky. right? I see what he does with his money. He's buying like lottery tickets or something, he's gambling. Usually what happens to the money of most gamblers who spend lots and lots of money and time in gambling? They don't make lots of money, okay? Right? Unless it's more than just a game of chance, if it's actually something else. What do you have to do in order to be successful? You got to be reasonable with your spending. How are you going to get that money in the first place? You got to what? Get a job and do what at the job? Work hard. It's called the Protestant work ethic. Write it down. I'll come back to that other slide here in a sec. It's called the Protestant work ethic. It's one of those interesting things that came out of John Calvin's ideas. And that is, you don't want to be seen like you are unblessed, that you're going to hell, that you're not predestined. And in your mind, you actually know, I know how I can prove to my neighbors that I'm all right, that God has favor on me. I'm going to work at it. And if you work at it, what might be the result? How many of you guys anticipate working real hard at school over the next 4 years? Raise your hand. How many guys are like, no, as soon as I can go into I just as soon drop out of school. I want to take whatever money I can get my hands on and gamble it and just hope that it works out. How many guys are like, that's your investment plan for your future? I am going to be successfully independent and wealthy by winning gambling ventures. And that's not your plan? How many guys have heard from other people, and maybe you've bought into it a little bit at this stage in your life, that you're going to work hard, that will bring you the things that you want in life and give you opportunities and yada, yada, yada? Right? Am I hearing that? Okay. In fact, sometimes you're like, that's what, because I've seen a lot of students come through these doors, and oh my gosh, there's some hard workers. But it's interesting, because hard work, just in a normal thing, yields success and da-da-da-da-da. But notice, in this situation, it's a little bit more. Because if you look successful, if Keith is walking down the street of Geneva and everyone's like, whoa, look at him. He's got nice clothes. He has got a nice haircut. Oh, he's walking to his nice house. That guy's blessed. He's going to heaven. And then you look at somebody else and they're just like not looking like they're having a real good day, and like their vehicle is up on cinder blocks and so forth, and their house is all kind of falling apart. They're like, that's not working out too well. I think they're going to the other place. I mean, I don't know if you necessarily would subscribe to that, but the fact that a lot of people did tells you what is going to happen in that community. If a lot of people want to impress their neighbors that they are going to heaven, they're going to be what? Hard workers. Write that down. You end up with a lot of hard workers. And it's a really interesting thing, because if you get a lot of hard workers working for the benefits themselves, and also maybe the idea that people will look at them and say you're going to heaven and so forth, what can you get if you have so many people working really, really hard? I mean, what impact is that going to have on your country? Could you imagine what would happen in Europe if over decades and decades and decades you had just lots and lots of really, really hard workers? I mean, what could Europe do? Like develop industry and science and like take over the world? It's an interesting thing in history. You've had some historians look back and say, one of the reasons perhaps for some of the success of Europe, perhaps, is you had a lot more of them walking around trying to impress other people that they were going to heaven. Now, you probably don't see that as much if you go to Europe and so forth or other neighborhoods, but do you want people to look at you 5, 10, 15 years from now and go, you're a hard worker. You've got cool stuff. Oh, and you're also a really good person, too. Because, I mean, in the mix of everything, those things matter. But, I mean, do you want to be seen as somebody that's just like, I don't know, just bring all those nice things to me. That's just the way it should be. No. Okay? Anyway, going back to so this is an interesting component that comes out of this whole Protestant thing. It's a work ethic thing. It's like weird. It's like they're going to have more economic success because of some ideas that John Calvin had. Let's go back to this question right here. Predestination versus free will. Which is it? Are you choosing to accept Christ and therefore going to heaven? Or were you selected by God ahead of time to go to heaven? Which is it? I love this. I wanted to draw a comic about free will, but I decided not to. Did he decide not to draw a comic about free will? He's lying, isn't he? What did he do? He drew a comic about free will. I mean, which is it? How many guys are like, I'm predestined to do what, my life is already laid out ahead of me? No? How many of you guys have, I have a lot of control over everything in my life? Or is it kind of a mix? Yeah, it's kind of like your attitude and so forth. Well, I know I'm going to have these various different challenges and so forth. How can you know? Which is it? I don't know, I'll throw this out there. One idea that both are true. How is it possible that both things can be true? You're predestined to go to heaven or hell, and you have a choice of accepting or not accepting. How can they both be true? Here's one idea. You choose something freely, but in an explanation as far as Christianity and so forth, is God limited by like a time sequence? According to Christianity, according to most religions, are they limited in time? Do they run sort of this to this to this to this? Or can a deity, a God, bounce around and know what is happening at all times and places? According to Christianity, their God knows what's going to happen the beginning, the middle, and the end, with everything going on in between. So perhaps, arguably, one explanation is you make a free will choice, but God already knows that you were going to do that. So therefore, he knows what the end of the game is. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. Okay? Let's go to Britain. Let's go to Britain. Right? We're going to spend some time now in a country known as England. They speak English. They have a king. His name is Henry VII. There's his wife, the Queen, Elizabeth. She's from an area of England called York, from the family of York. And Henry was from a family called Lancaster. Write it down. Henry VII and Elizabeth. They got married. They're English. There's the king and the queen. Isn't that lovely? Have I told you anything interesting about them so far? Mm-mm. Their families were not necessarily, well, let's just put it this way. There was a huge, huge war in England before he became king. It was called the War of the Roses. The red rose of the Lancasters and the white rose of the York. And they were fighting over who was going to be in charge. And he ultimately won. There was a lot of fighting and killing and so forth. And he ultimately won. And he got married to somebody from the other group. And so England was happy. They were all united again. Isn't that lovely? It's lovely. And of course, one of the things, write this down. One of the things, if you're the king of a country, you want to make sure that when you're gone, everybody is cool with who the next king is, right? Everybody's cool with that. And so, because if they're not, that was part of the problem before. That was why one of the reasons why they had the big fight. They're like, well, who's supposed to be the king? I don't know, this person, that person. So they had this big, huge, massive, bloody war over who was going to become king. If they can all agree on who's going to become the next king, then we don't have these big wars. So, here we go. Elizabeth and Henry had a child, a boy. Is it better to have a boy to become the next monarch or a girl? Raise your hand if you're like, a boy will definitely do a better job than a girl. Oh. Raise your hand if you're like, a girl will definitely do a better job. Raise your hand if you're like, whoever's the first one should be it. Well, historically, write this down. It was favoring boys. It was favoring boys. And when we get back to the story, we'll see that Henry VII and Elizabeth had an heir and a spare. Had a son and another son. And the name of the son who became king after Henry VII was set to be? Nope, it was Arthur. We'll tell you more about that story. Because guess what the name of the younger brother was? It was Henry. And guess what he will become when he becomes king? Henry VIII. Have you heard of Henry VIII? Did he have marriages? He had 6 wives. So we'll tell more of that story next time. All right. Very good.
No, I was talking to you the whole time. You got stuck on that one little for so long. The one with the little
Okay.
degree.
Oh. You were going to tell me to turn it off. You forgot.
Turn it off.
Okay, I'm going to turn it off now.